Well, here we are. Welcome everybody to what I think is the 10th episode of our podcast. How quickly these episodes tick by.
It's flown by.
Yeah. Now, as ever, we start proceedings with our slightly random preamble and chit chat, and we're going to kick off this time by talking about pets that we had when we were growing up, childhood pets. So, Adam, let's start with you.
Yeah. I'm going to break the rules as always. I'll tell you, a childhood pet, we had some rabbits that were dwarf rabbits in the shop, and we had a drain pipe they could run through, and after some months they were enormous rabbits and would kind of flop over the pipe and kind of look like they mournfully remembered better days. Then we had big fat rabbits basically. But my mum now has Allegra the tortoise, who was a birthday present for my middle brother. But keeps mum company and rampages around the garden.
Well, they do move quickly.
In the sun today, you'd be breaking the sound barrier.
A dwarf rabbit's a little bit like those. They're not called pygmy goats. Pygmy pigs. The ones that people buy, those miniature pigs, and then they're just normal pigs. And they grow to normal pig size, and then people expect them to be really cute and tiny.
I don't think we were scammed, but I can't I think there are real teacup pigs, but I think you have to be very careful.
Possibly. I think they might have been malnourished when they were sold. One or the other.
Terrible.
Mr. Monroe, what about you? Any childhood pets?
Where to start? Well, my dad was vehemently against having pets in the house, mainly because 3 children was enough animals in the house to deal with on his own. However, we originally had a rescue dog that was there for me and my sister, and then my mum and dad had my brother. Obviously, worst thing in the world, we had to get rid of the dog. Then we didn't get pets again until some friends of ours donated some rabbits. 2 rabbits called Fluffy and Snowy, original names of course. They were just white and fluffy. And that all was going quite well until my dad was in charge of putting where these rabbits were going to be homed. And so at the front of our house we had this beautiful little berry bush, and my dad decided to get the hutch and put it at the front of the house. You know, we'd come out to school and we'd feed little rabbits. My dad, what he didn't do was he didn't check whether the berries were poisonous.
Oh, right.
And so come autumn, Fluffy and Snowy were no longer quite so fluffy and snowy. But, you know, that was fine. It was a good first experience, and my dad got to have a wonderful lecture about death with us, which goes very well.
Are you sure your dad didn't check whether or not the berries were poisonous?
You thought he was an elaborate euthaniser.
Is that a criminal allegation or not?
He's a bishop now, you can't be saying these kinds of slander.
I think we'll move on.
Yeah. And how about you, James?
Well, growing up in my family, my sister was, and indeed still is, the big animal lover. And a bit like you said, James, my parents said, no, we're not having pets. But then Lucy, being Lucy, managed to persuade and cajole, and eventually we got a rabbit. We actually had 2 rabbits over the years.
All 3 of us having rabbits is a bit of a coincidence. Must be something to do with ministry.
Yeah, unfortunately neither of them lived particularly long. But then we had a dog in the days when you could buy from a litter of puppies. And
is that why the rabbits didn't live very long?
No. Well, there's a funny story there, Adam, about how the second rabbit and the dog, when the dog was a puppy, they actually grew to become quite good friends and they curl up together on the dog's beanbag. It was quite cute. But yeah, we. This is in the heady days of the Doncaster Advertiser, free newspaper.
Oh yeah.
A litter of puppies for sale. We got Meg, who was a mongrel, for about £5, I think it was.
Oh,
she was around for about 14 years, I think.
So Hannah will be pleased. Mongrels are definitely the way to go if you want a long living, healthy dog.
Yeah. So she was there right up until we went away to university and stuff. So she was around for quite a significant length of time.
Yeah, fair enough.
In our sort of childhood and older youth.
Now, James, I'd be remiss for not asking, perhaps you're thinking this as well, Adam, what on earth have pets got to do with our podcast about churchy related stuff?
Well, that is a very good question, James, and the reason is, drum roll, because we are going in our main segment in a moment to talk about Cat-echisms. Gong.
Nice.
Yeah, catechisms, which is what we are going to, after the usual shuffle around of chairs, move on to next.
Wonderful. I look forward to hearing about it. arrived in our main segment, and James, I'm going to be honest with you. I heard other James talk about this word catechism, and that sounds like Christianese nonsense to me, gobbledygook, fairy tale language. And I'd love for you to tell me, what is a catechism?
Okay. So catechism is essentially just learning stuff.
Okay.
All right. So in a catechism, you decide you're going to learn certain things, but essentially, to do a catechism is that you learn stuff by rote, so that you know it, so that later on you'll be able to remember it.
So that's quite old school.
Well, it is old school, but it's not really old school, is it? Because I think the analogy I would use is something like driving. Okay, so when you're driving, there's certain things that you just have to know, but you can't always go back to the highway code and say, "Oh, well, let me just check. I wouldn't have crashed into you if I need to check what my stopping distance is. I'd forgotten, didn't have instant recall on it, so I've crashed into you, but it's not my fault because obviously, like, you wouldn't want me to kind of have to learn something. So it's not really old school, is it? It's old school in the sense that we don't necessarily value it in the church as much as we used to, but we value it everywhere else because there's, in every profession, in every walk of life, in everything we do, there's just some stuff that you have to know.
Yeah.
And you can't avoid that.
And it's not just knowledge, it's practical knowledge. It's knowledge to go into wisdom.
It's knowledge to go into wisdom, yeah. So, and you need to know it because you need to be able to use that information.
So old school might be alright.
Yeah, but that, I think that's kind of the sort of first defence, because you're right, the first question people say is, "Oh, we don't do that anymore. We don't do that anymore, do we?" Because the whole we had a big reaction against learning by rote, although actually
It's quite
you
good.
kind of still do it. You still do it at school. Times tables have made a bit of a comeback, and that is kind of essentially learning by rote, because the idea is that if you learn something, then you know it, and then when you need it later on,
It's there.
it's there. So I say, "Adam, what's 9 times 7?
And I say 63.
Very good.
Hey, you
I'm
do another one.
glad you got asked that question. I would have been an extra second or two.
Yeah, it was mean because it's always
fear and adrenaline.
it's always the ones involving sevens that are the tricky ones, isn't it? But yeah, so that is something that we do, and that kind of brings us on to the kind of value of it. I made the comment about the highway code, and that's slightly jokey, but the idea is that if the stuff that we know, then when it comes to a moment where we're not sure, when we've got a question, when someone asks us a question, or when we're trying to say, well, what's true, what's not, what's God like, what is it that Jesus did? If we've got something, if we know something, if we've got something that we've learnt, then that might not give us every answer, and it's not that we're going to try and learn all of the scriptures, but we might at least have somewhere where we say, right, well, I know that, and then I can do some other stuff from that basis. So I think that's really what catechism is, and that the value of it is that you internalise, and therefore you've got recall, and therefore, just like the times table, when the adrenaline starts pumping, you know the answer. Okay. So that was a bit mean. We didn't even practice that.
No, but I really enjoyed it.
You did, because there was that moment where you think, and then you're like, no, I know the answer. This is all good.
So I'd be remiss, maybe it's worth us touching on, for people who maybe haven't read the Catechism before, there's some examples of parts of the Catechism, so that people have an idea of what kind of things you're learning by rote.
So then, yeah, that's kind of what is it? What is a catechism? So there's various ways of approaching it. So some church traditions will have a set of questions. The questions about sort of theology, about the cross, about what Jesus did, about who God is, who the Holy Spirit is, that kind of stuff. The Anglican Catechism, which is the one we use when we do a catechism, is a little bit like that. It is sort of a set of questions, but it's focused on 3 things, okay? So if you learn the Anglican Catechism, what you're essentially doing is you're learning the Lord's Prayer, the 10 Commandments, and the Apostles' Creed, okay? Which is probably a relief to some of the people listening, because some of them are thinking, well, I can probably do the Lord's Prayer with a little bit of version control. I do about half the commandments, and I probably know most of the Apostles' Creed. So for a lot, for a lot of people, this wouldn't be adding loads of additional knowledge if you would say, "Oh, do the Catechism." So that's what it's built around. Now, obviously, then you can develop that. You can then start to ask questions about those things that you've learned. So, once you've learned the Ten Commandments, you can say, what does this commandment teach us?
Mm-hmm.
So you can sort of expand it then. So there's a sort of a basic core, and then you can expand and say, what does this mean, or what are the implications of this? So on the Ten Commandments, for example, you can spend quite a bit of time thinking, okay, you've got this commandment which is thou shalt not murder, you shall not murder.
Mm-hmm.
What does that actually mean? Well, obviously it means don't murder people, but actually it's not just a commandment about that, it's also a commandment about valuing life.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, it's not just about murder, is it? That's the commandment about how we treat other human beings, isn't it? It's about how it's about valuing life and respecting life, which means as well as the things not to do, you're then into the positive side of it.
Yeah.
How do you value life? How do you encourage human flourishing? So all the kind of stuff you might talk about human flourishing, you can talk about in relation to the commandments.
Mm-hmm.
The same way sometimes when we study prayer, we talk about taking the kind of shape of the Lord's Prayer.
Yes,
and going a bit
exactly.
further with
So the Lord's Prayer is both our prayer to pray
Yeah.
and our way of thinking about prayer.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that gives you the scaffolding then. So then you're not always having to start again
Yeah.
and reinvent the wheel every time you need to think about something. You've actually got some scaffolding.
But at the same time, we're not doing some of the other catechisms which have got their own different questions. So we're sort of taking a quite easy to get into approach. But then there are loads more to look at if you're interested.
There
Go on
are.
Google. So
So-
Westminster.
Yeah,
Does
so
that start with what's the chief end of man?
that's the chief end of man, to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. So what we currently do is when we do confirmation, obviously I haven't done a confirmation course for a while, we've got confirmation coming up this year, or if you're really late listening to this podcast, we had confirmation last year. We've got confirmation coming up this year, and I will, in September, October, spend some time with the young people, the teenagers getting confirmed, and their confirmation class, if you like, will be to work through the Anglican Catechism, which is to talk through some introductory questions, which are really nice. They're quite interesting, the Anglican ones, because they first of all say, what's your name? And they take people back to their baptism to start with, and then when you talk about Ten Commandments, Lord's Prayer, Apostles' Creed, and then there's a few questions at the end of the Anglican Catechism about what is communion, because the idea of the Catechism is that you're supposed to do it with teenagers, young people, as they own the faith for themselves, which is the point where you get them confirmed. So there's a kind of rubric in the prayer book that says that the curate should gather them together, and as soon as they're able to recite the Ten Commandments, the Lord's Prayer, and know the answers to the Catechism, then they're ready to be confirmed. And then sort of when the bishop next comes past on his horse, you can just sort of stand them outside the church, and they can get confirmed. The last bit may have been slightly extrapolated. But yeah, that's the idea. So we kind of do that.
And that explains we're quite relaxed about communion, but it explains why in a lot of churches communion's for confirmed people, because it's not just a kind of a rule to be nasty. It's this is supposed to mean that you know what communion is.
And obviously the picture with communion is complicated, because what you want to do when anybody comes for communion is you want to honour their existing church practice.
Yeah.
So because lots of churches have different practices, particularly around children, then you want to honour that. You don't want somebody who would receive communion somewhere else being refused or feeling they weren't able to come to the table. There are times when you know that's a different podcast, but that's what we do with communion. But obviously, as people are taking communion, you want people to understand what it is and what it isn't. So we do it then. The other time we use the structure of it is when we do the Way, the Truth and the Life course.
Right.
So we've got the courses that sort of rotate round. So we've got the Bible overview, we've got the church history course, which again is coming up this autumn, or again last autumn if you're watching this late. And we've got the Way, the Truth and the Life. The Way, the Truth and the Life is very deliberately goes through the Creed, the Ten Commandments and the Lord's Prayer.
Okay.
Using the Anglican Catechism, and actually, to come back to something you said earlier, supplementing it, because what the Anglican Catechism doesn't do so much is that interrogation of the Ten Commandments to say, okay, what's the implication of thou shalt not murder? What's the implication of thou shalt not bear false witness. How do we actually unpack that for what it means about how we're supposed to relate to one another?
Yeah.
Because anyone who's been to one of your courses will know that we don't do anything that you can't get half an hour of tangent out of.
Absolutely, no.
So there's a real richness there.
There's a real richness.
It's not just something you will learn once and then it's sort of stuck there doing nothing.
Yeah, but it's all based. It's all kind of built. It's all built on that foundation. That's the idea. These are the building blocks. Okay, let's put these building blocks in place, and then we can build on top of them. And look, we could spend a long time discussing whether these are the right building blocks. I think it's very hard to argue against the Lord's Prayer as a model of prayer. I think actually it's really hard to argue against the Ten Commandments as a foundational summary of God's law, which, as we know from the New Testament, Jesus fulfilled but did not get rid of.
Yeah.
You could argue a bit about the Apostles' Creed because it isn't a scriptural summary, but it's been around long enough. It's a good place to start. We tend to supplement it with the other two creeds as well. With the what's the other one called?
Nicene.
Thank you, the Nicene Creed, and of course the Athanasian Creed, which you'll both be familiar with.
Well,
Of course.
ask me that one.
Yeah, perhaps not quite familiar with that one. We do use the Athanasian Creed because that's really strong on the person of Christ, and it's really strong on the Trinity. So we use those as well. And then, in a sense, you're always then saying, well, there are other resources out there. So you've mentioned the Westminster Catechism. There's also the Heidelberg Catechism.
Heidelberg's great from
which
what
I
I've
go,
seen.
yeah, and again, because you've got that practical balance between length and depth. So you don't want something too short, but frankly, you don't want something too long.
But they're not questions that don't come up in life. They're really practically focused.
They are.
We've
yeah.
talked a bit about things being old school,
Yeah.
but in a lot of the best youth and children's work thinking that we've seen, the Catechism comes up a little bit because the same questions are being asked. You know, who am I and what am I here for?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
It's
absolutely.
not an outdated.
No, it's a very
question.
important question, isn't it? And a question that people are really struggling with the answer for.
And it's about those building blocks.
Yeah,
those
it is,
foundations.
and there's also something here about at what point, in the way that our minds work, at what point is it easiest to remember stuff?
Yeah.
So we know, don't we? It's a lot easier to learn a language when you're younger than when you're older. It's just quicker because your mind is wired in certain ways. And therefore, actually, the process of learning stuff, the process of catechism, there's an argument that actually the best time to do that is actually when you're a bit younger. Now, and then you want to be able to reflect on it. And obviously, it's easier to reflect on something if you know it.
Yeah.
So the process of saying, okay, well, think about what the Lord's Prayer. Okay, well, we all know that, so we can all think about that. Think about what it says in the Ten Commandments. Oh yeah, well, we all basically know those, so that's all right. We can reflect on that. So it's that process of being able to say, oh yeah, that's something that we know about, so we can think about it some more. That's what we do. We do confirmation classes. We do the way, the truth, and the life, and we do bits and bobs. So you've mentioned some stuff in youth work. We've definitely talked about doing some more catechism, I think, in youth work.
There was a discussion for quite a while about doing a more unified, or coming up with a unified sort of syllabus for the kind of content that we'd like our children to work their way through, so that by the time they get to sort of 14 or whatever point we're sort of making that cut-off, they're coming into church and sitting with the wider church family with a strong foundation where they can engage with everybody else at a same baseline that we'd expect people to be at. In practice, it's very hard to find time to organise all of that, but the goal is there are fundamental things that we want them to go over, like the Lord's Prayer, which obviously, and the Ten Commandments, and Apostles' Creed is also a great example, but it's less so doing it via the Apostles' Creed and more that we tend to just go over the fundamental truths about what we believe. But,
We've also looked a little bit at the New City Catechism, which
Yes.
has been worked by Mel Lacey and some people who are involved a lot in youth work, to kind of try and bring this thing back
that
into
was
fashion.
Keller's thing, wasn't it? Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so originally. And that's quite nice because it has two sets of answers, doesn't it? It has the short answer and the long answer.
Yeah.
Which is supposed to be the short answer for the children and the long answer for the adults, but in terms of learning capacity, it's probably the short answer for the adults. The long answer for just in terms of ability to learn information by rote.
Yeah.
There's some good stuff out there. Yeah, I think at the moment our plan is to kind of build on the Anglican one, but there is some work to do just in teasing some of that out.
Yeah.
For me, if you're going to do catechism, the more universal you can make it, the better. So, if someone comes here, not everybody who comes here is an Anglican. I know that's a surprise to you both, but you want to equip people with stuff which is just always relevant. And I think if you're talking Ten Commandments, Lord's Prayer, and Apostles' Creed, you're always there.
So it's not a course for teenagers to know which colour tablecloth should be in which season?
No, it isn't. That's generally not what we focus on. I mean, I can tell you the answer to that if you care. But
I'll save it for another episode.
Yeah, save it for another episode.
But I think the universal aspect is it's bringing that focus of if you're a Christian, you're coming to church. These are the universal truths that pretty much that hopefully every church should be.
Yeah, and I think
adhering to.
I think sort of culturally watching the church over the last 30 odd years, I think we probably did make a mistake in turning our back on learning stuff. To be honest, reflecting that, I think that probably you can kind of understand why it happened. It was part of a wider sort of societal rejection of the old ways and rejection of learning, and having to learn these, who wants to have to learn the capitals of all the countries? I mean, they change.
Elijah does.
Yeah, well, yeah, but that's because he wanted to. But being geography lessons being all about that. Well, of course we does feel like a waste of time. I get that, and longest rivers and all the rest of it, unless you're interested in it. But that doesn't mean we should stop learning things completely. It's classic, isn't it? We always do this. We overreact. So we want to get rid of something and we get rid of everything. So I do think it would benefit people. It's really interesting working with an older generation, and now really often we're talking people over the age of 80 who do know their Lord's Prayer, Creed, and Ten Commandments. Thank you. I couldn't remember which one I've missed.
That's all right.
And Ten Commandments, and actually how useful that is to them.
So now and then, in our home group, Marion will come out with a little bit of liturgy that she's really enjoyed for a little while. That
she's known for, and
it's in there,
and I think and I think it's really interesting, isn't it? That I don't know that the next generation down and beyond has that, and that's actually a shame.
There's a loss.
There's a loss there. So,
is there an argument there for? Is it worth doing it in a service or having maybe a series where we actually are reinforcing?
Yeah, I think we do need to do it. I mean, we've done some children's talks.
We have.
We could go back to that again. It could be something that we do. I think I did a series on the Ten Commandments. Maybe I didn't. I can't remember.
Not while I've been here.
No, it would be a few
but
years
I think
ago.
doing one on the Creed would be interesting, going over each of the truths that we're asserting.
Yeah, I think we could do some topical stuff on that, couldn't we? It would probably fit quite nicely into one of our 6-week slots in the evening service.
That'd be great.
So yeah, I think we do need, every time we have this conversation every so often, and I always think we need to do a bit more of this, and then other things happen. There's always so many things to do, and we don't want to miss out on all the stuff about 2 Kings 3 and Moab and all the rest of the stuff. So but we need to find some time to do that and find some creative ways. Oh, go on then. You can ask.
If I were someone who's a bit interested in this but not quite sure. If I were to go along to some classes and do a little bit of catechism and then think, I don't want to be confirmed, or this isn't me, would I be stuck in forever?
No, because the whole thing, the purpose of the confirmation class is to see whether or not you want to get confirmed.
So you don't need to be nervous that if you start, you might become a bishop or something.
If you need to be careful, but obviously we can put breakpoints in. And the other thing to say, just whilst we're on confirmation, and I have sort of said this elsewhere, we will do some sort of confirmation prep for any adults that want to get confirmed, but you won't have to do it with the teenagers.
Okay.
But you'll be missing out. They ask some cracking questions.
Let me also say to the teenagers, you won't have to do it with your parents, which is kind of the more important thing.
But actually, what a great idea that parents and teenagers will be doing the same thing together, and might both come home and go, What's number 9 again? I can't
Yeah.
remember.
It's-
What have
yeah.
you been enjoying about this?
Yeah, but not for confirmation class.
No.
My confirmation class, we had I think it was 3 adults who had just joined the church
Yeah.
with like fairly new Christians, and then two like me and another teenager, and it was actually quite good getting that discussion because there were 2 different perspectives. You had 2 younger people
Yeah.
who had like grown up with the Catechism sort of in their orbit, and then 3 adults who didn't have it at all being taught it, and the discussion that came from that was a little bit more enjoyable. But well, speaking about importance and keeping on to good tracks of time, we should probably draw this main section
Yeah,
to a close.
yeah.
See you all in a minute.
Good. Well, I'm in the white chair, but I'm not going to ask you about your pets. All I'm going to do is say, what are we doing next time?
Well, I'm preaching this Sunday, so if we could talk a bit about sermon prep.
Okay.
That would be good.
Well, that'd be useful. Is there sufficient time?
I will see on
Okay,
Sunday.
good. All right, so next time we're going to talk about the process of sermon prep.
Yeah.
And as ever, please do send in your questions. We do appreciate them. Some of you have sent in questions. We'll see that we are gradually answering some of them. So we'll get to some more as well. Thank you. See you next time.
Bye.